Today we're going to talk about non-self. We always talk about non-self in Buddhism, but what does it really mean? We will look at verses from the Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way by Bodhisattva Nagarjuna. If I'm the five aggregates, then I'm subject to rising and ceasing. Bodhisattva Nagarjuna always used deductive reasoning for us to come up with the conclusion ourselves. Hypothetically, if I am the five aggregates, which is our body and mind, then I'm subject to rising and ceasing. What we call the self in Buddhism, it has to meet three criteria. First, it must be permanent, always the same. And it must be independent, not dependent on other factors. And it must be controlling, it's self-sustaining, have the power to direct itself. But in this world, you cannot find such thing. We call it the permanent self. But we must stay thinking there is such a thing that is always permanent, always independent, and always controlling. So this is saying, if I am this five aggregate, then I'm subject to rising and ceasing. I have birth, aging, sickness, and death. So if I'm always changing, then it doesn't meet the three criteria. I am not permanent because it's always rising, ceasing, constantly in flux, constantly unstable. There's no such thing as the permanent fixed self that we think is me. So this five aggregate cannot be the self that we are assuming. These five aggregates, what we call the five skandhas, the form, the feelings, our perception, our mental formation, and our consciousness. Form, which is the four elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. We are made out of the four great elements, but it's constantly changing and dependent on each other. My body, it changes every day. So when I was little, 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 20, 30, there's no such thing as me. That's permanent. My feeling, happiness and sorrow, it changes all the time. And my perception, my thoughts, my emotions, my likes and dislikes, every day is changing. Now I'm 50, it's very different from when I was 5. My mental formation, deep mental attachment to things that I like or dislike, and this whole alaya consciousness that's full of karmic seeds is moment to momentarily changing. These aggregates, they are cumulative and they are changing every day, and these changing conditions are not me. As we can see from this first deductive reasoning, that I am not the five aggregates. On the other hand, if I'm different from the five aggregates, then I should not be characterized by them. Like some externalists, they think there is a higher God controlling everything. Does that make sense? If I'm different from the five aggregate, there is a controlling permanent self that is outside of my body and mind. But how come I still look like this? How I live this life is because of this body and my feelings and my thoughts, my emotions. So it cannot be true that there's something outside of me that is the controlling self. There is not a self that is the five aggregate or that is not the five aggregate. Therefore, we conclude there's no such thing as a permanent, independent me or self. There was a monk that went to a village. He saw a group of young people arguing about the nature of the self. Wise monk went and started telling them a story. There was a very wealthy man. He had a beautiful chariot. This chariot is decorated with gold and precious stone. Everybody admired this chariot. But one day, this chariot broke down and needed repair. The wealthy man had to change its axle, its frame, and wheels. It was all changed. The monk asked these young people, is this chariot the same as before, or is it different? Everybody pondered upon it. Some said, it's the same chariot. Some said, it's a different one now, since all its parts have been changed. The monk said, just like our five aggregates are constantly changing, so where is the self that you think is me? So as you can see, this five aggregate is really not the me that we are identified with. But you cannot say there's an emptiness outside of the five aggregate, because either way it's a misconception. There's no such thing as the self or non-self. So you have to let go all duality. If there is no self, how can there be anything that belongs to the self? We always say, this is I, this is mine. My name, my family, my job, my house. Does anything belong to you? If there is not an entity called you, there's no subject, how can there be object? So that doesn't make any sense, that anything belongs to the self. That is a big discovery. If you can let go of the self, you will get rid of all your problems. If a person on the street says, I hate you, I might be upset, but only for a little while because I don't know this person. But if you come home, your wife or your husband says, I hate you, now you will remember it and you guys will argue and for a long time. Why? Because this is your husband, this is your wife. So when we attach a personal relationship to this event, to this thing, it becomes drama because we have this concept of the self and what belongs to me. If we can acknowledge or come to realization, there is really not a me and there is really not anything that I possess, you will be able to have freedom and inner peace that will be liberation from all suffering. Eliminating the self and what belongs to the self is called attaining the wisdom of non-self. If we let go the concept of I and mine, that is the wisdom of non-self. We call it prajna of emptiness. So non-self means emptiness. Not just self is empty, all phenomena are empty. That is true wisdom. In the Heart Sutra, it says, form itself is emptiness. Emptiness itself is form. This is wisdom of non-self. So form, its essence, its true nature, is non-form, what we call emptiness. And emptiness, it cannot be separated from all the five aggregates, all the phenomena of the world. They're not exactly the same, but they are not exactly different. So existence and non-existence, they are mutually contained in each other. That's wisdom of non-self. In summary, form is the manifestation of emptiness. Emptiness is the underlying nature of all form. That's the relationship between form and emptiness. One who attains the wisdom of non-self is said to have true insight. We meditate on non-self to come to realization about the true nature of all things. See beyond all superficial appearances. Then you will be able to see life is really a dream. You have the power to change your mind and change your life and change this worldly existence and make it into a pure land by understanding true wisdom. You can be a true bodhisattva, have unconditional love, great compassion for all sentient beings. Your wisdom brought out your great compassion and wisdom. That is like the Buddha. In the Lotus Sutra, it talks about a wealthy old man. He has a big old house. He has many children that live inside this house. One day, the house caught on fire. But all the children, they don't know what's fire. They kept playing with their toys in the house. The old man had to lure them with toys If you guys come out now, I already prepared toys with goat card and deer card and bullock card. If you just come out, you have all the toys that you desire. The kids, they're all excited, so they all came out. Once they got out, the father only gave them the precious carriage drawn by pure white ox. We are all sentient beings in this burning house, in samsara, thinking that the five aggregate is the self. Buddha is his old father, trying to tell us to come out. Because of his wisdom of emptiness, he has skillful ways. He says he will have go-kart, which means the Shravaka vehicle, which is the Theravada Buddhist who understands non-self, but only for self-liberation. The deer cart means the Pratyeka vehicle, because deer usually travel by themselves. It's also Theravada Buddhist, but they are usually cultivated by themselves. And the bullock's cart, that is the Bodhisattva vehicle. So because everybody understands non-self in different ways, so non-self will mean different things to different kind of people. Buddha have the ultimate wisdom of non-self. He's able to have expedient way to teach us all kinds of teachings. But ultimately, he gives us the pure white ox, which means our mind is originally the Buddha. It's always been non-self, and it's always have been nirvana. Those who attain the wisdom of non-self are indeed rare. When you see non-self in the Mahayana way, you are with rare wisdom. You might just be the one who has this great insight. Once a well-practiced monk had to travel, so he got on a boat. He looked at the boatman and asked him, "How long have you been rowing boat?" And he said, "I've been rowing for 30 years. The monk thought he must have a lot of wisdom. So asked the boatman, "What do you think is the meaning of non-self?" The boatman said, "Look at my boat. It's made out of different parts, wood, nail, plastic, that's constantly changing. There is not a permanent thing that we call boat. That's the same as our body. It's always changing, never the same, but you cannot say it doesn't exist. Same as the river. There's not a moment, it's the same river. Water is constantly flowing, but you cannot say the river doesn't exist. So from the river and the boat, I realized that there's not a permanent, independent self. That's what I learned in my 30 years of rowing the boat." The monk realized, wow, this boatman actually is more enlightened than me. So you just never know. You might be the rare person that is like Bodhisattva Nagarjuna. So that's the class for today. Thank you so much for listening. Amitabha.